It's a pretty big deal to announce the death of a political party, but I believe that's exactly what happened last week because it's happened before. And when it did, the result was the end of several parties and the beginning of a new movement. I want to tell you about what we found. Have you ever heard of the Crime Against Kansas speech delivered by Charles Sumner? The Republican Party, as we know it, was formed when a coalition of people who weren't of any establishment party came together on a platform of anti-slavery. They believed simply in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And to make it even stranger, they also wanted to go back to the founding principles of the Republic, and that's why it became the Republican Party. The Republican Party started out as a pro-freedom movement, and its primary platform was to oppose slavery. In 1854, men from 5 fragmented parties put aside partisan differences and fought for human freedom, not special interests and not their parties. And here they were. There were the Free Soilers. That was a party who wanted to prevent slavery from spreading into the West. There were the Emancipationists, then the Whigs. They formed a party in opposition to big government policies of Andrew Jackson. Then the Isolationists, Know-Nothings. And lastly, the anti-slavery Democrats. And those 5 groups got together and they created the Republican Party. But that wasn't necessarily their intent right away. It happened when the Kansas-Nebraska Acts were enacted, which were laws reversing some of the anti-slavery laws in the United States. And 30 of these men came together, vote against the forming of that law, and those 30 men formed the Republican Party. This new party captured the people's hearts and their minds, and the feelings were so profound that in the election of 1856, the new movement took a governorship, in fact took several of them, state legislators, U.S. House, and the U.S. Senate. That's why it was called a movement at first. By 1860, they took the presidency with a man named Abraham Lincoln. But the anti-slavery movement and mentality was most clearly brought to the public eye in 1856 during a speech made by a Democrat, a senator from Massachusetts named Charles Sumner. His speech is known today as the Crime Against Kansas speech. It is this speech that we found an old copy of it today. It was an unapologetic and fiery condemnation of slavery. But in this speech, the senator made one big mistake, one that almost cost him his life. While he was on the floor of the Senate, he called out specific people. He embarrassed them, and he castigated their character. But his most grievous error was calling out Senator Andrew Butler by name. You see, on the floor of the Senate, you don't use names. You don't use the other senator's name. You always refer to them as the good gentleman from South Carolina or the gentleman from Illinois. You never call anybody out by name. That's ungentlemanly. Well, Charles Sumner called Butler out by name, and so his cousin, Preston Brooks, who was in the House of Representatives, came from across the way and took his cane and cracked Sumner over the head with a thick gold-plated cane, nearly breaking his skull. Sumner fell immediately to the floor, and his attacker ripped up the desk from the Senate floor and continued to beat him until he was blinded with his own blood. Sumner bled on the floor while Brooks assaulted him. And finally, the cane broke in half, and Sumner was left on the floor unconscious. That day, the senator should have died. Medicine wasn't, what it is now. And when he survived, none of the doctors actually believed it was even possible. But still, 3 years later, Senator Sumner stumbled onto the Senate floor to finish his speech. He was limping, he couldn't walk straight, and he could barely speak, but he kept on fighting. This was his Crime Against Kansas speech. And from this speech, the first Republican Party platform was drafted. It was only 9 planks long. The year was 1856. The platform ultimately would become the deal that severed the blacks from their slave owners, emancipation, ending slavery. The most important difference between what happened with Rand Paul's speech last weekend and Senator Sumner's speech of 1856 is, well, Rand Paul wasn't beaten with a cane. And he didn't personally attack anyone. He didn't insult Obama's intentions, his motives, or his character. He just defended the Constitution. He said he had a duty to point out when principles he felt were being violated. He stuck to his principles. He did what he believed was right. However, somebody did come in and attack him. The slight change in the story is the senators, not the congressmen, who stood against him, personally attacked him on the floor, and they called him out by name.
Give Rand Paul credit for theatrical timing. If Mr. Paul wants to be taken seriously, he needs to do more than pull political stunts that fire up impressionable libertarian kids in their college dorms.
Okay. They mocked him and ridiculed him, and they read from editorials. But Rand Paul was a gentleman throughout. He didn't have a cane, he didn't attack. But John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Bill Kristol, and everybody else, their words are their cane. Sumner left the Democrats, and they attacked him because of it, because his allegiance was not towards the Democrats, but to human freedom. I contend this is exactly the same thing. Rand Paul repeated Sumner's moment because his allegiance was not to the Republicans, but to human freedom. He and those who stand with him, Republican and Democrat, liberal and conservative, those small government-minded Americans who understand how important the Bill of Rights is to all men, will come under attack because they will put principles over party. Just so you know, in 1854, because of their commitment to principle, in 6 years, the Republicans went from not a party at all to controlling both branches of the government and having a president. No third party has ever done that since. And that is why this was a movement. And that is why things will change because of what happened last week. Today, our choice is whether or not we're going to nurture a movement. Which side are we on? We can't build it in the way anyone is trying to do it, because if we tried to build a third party from the top down, you would lose. Even Teddy Roosevelt, who was immensely popular when he ran on the Bull Moose Party ticket, which was a progressive ticket, he only got 19% of the vote. What started out last week with Rand Paul, in the end, will take the school boards, the city council, and elect state representatives that people can trust. And then it will take seats in the House and the Senate, and it will eventually claim the White House. But will it do it with a GOP name? Which one will win in the end? Which one will become the Whig Party? And by the way, by the time it takes the White House, Americans, just like you, will have once again set things so right in this country that those positions in Washington will once again be the least important positions in any government in our nation. A historic movement has begun. You were here to hear the heartbeat when the Tea Party started. And last week, you witnessed the birth.